My guest today is the Director and Principal Consultant of Leading Roles. Can I welcome to the podcast, Mark Ogston? How are you, mate?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you and also your patience with me getting here.
Mate, that's no worries. What I'm here to do on this podcast is to talk about your entrepreneurial pathway, sir. So let me start at the beginning. How did you become an entrepreneur? And give me the why, mate. Why go down this pathway?
Oh, the why. Look, I think maybe I'll start at the beginning. Leading Roles is a local government specialist recruitment business. And I have a long history of working around local governments, both in councils. I started as a health inspector a long time ago as a junior officer, through to quite senior roles in businesses that support local governments or undertake some functions that local governments do. So I was in the UK running waste and cleansing services, building services management type things for social housing, which is owned by councils in the UK. And then I worked here in Australia for a couple of different companies that support councils in what they do. I was very fortunate to build strong relationships within this level of government and, of course, the businesses that support them. And in April 2012, so we've just turned 8 a week or so ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. We launched Leading Roles with the goal of transforming local governments everywhere through high-performing people, providing high-quality service, building a team of knowledgeable and engaged people, and just operating with high levels of integrity in our dealings with our clients. And it's been quite successful. It's been really good.
I'm blown away that each one of these podcasts with you entrepreneurial types throws up different things for me to ask as follow-up questions. So you talk about your values when you were moving between jobs, and you talked about integrity, and you wanted to do something that fitted with your worldview. So is that a typical trait for the entrepreneurs that you've met, that it's about not just making the dollar, which is important, I guess, if you're going to start a business, about being able to make a profit, but also that it's about the integrity you bring to the role, or is it about the people in the role? Like what are those core elements that drove you to want to then put your own sort of stamp on it and say, right, I'm going to do this a little differently, and these are the things that drive me? Because it's interesting that you also mentioned in your response there, Mark, that you talked about you come from a private sector, excuse me for my stupidity, a public sector background, and that has shaped your thinking. I guess my question is, did those things help to shape the kind of entrepreneur you were, or did working for bad potential bosses help to shape the entrepreneur that you were?
I've had some great bosses and some terrible bosses.
Sure, as have we all, sir. As have we all.
You learn something from all of them.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a few sort of questions there. So coming from a public sector type background and into a private sector one, I didn't last a whole lot of time working in councils. I probably had maybe 2 years at the most in total. But maybe a step backwards, why become an entrepreneur? Why take that on? I find it difficult to call myself an entrepreneur, so just bear with me while I struggle with that.
Sure, that's all right.
I think you see things that need to be changed. My ability to put up with those things eventually causes me enough pain to go, right, I have to do this and I have to do it better. What I've done after a career of working around councils and seeing what amazing work they do and how communities thrive when councils do a great job, and also having had sort of sales and business development type roles where I'm closely working with and observing the people in the sector, it became very clear to me that one way that I could help the sector that I like and enjoy working in the most would be to make sure that they had the right people doing the right things at the right time. So perhaps, and I was looking at who else was doing it, and I was just thinking, oh my God, no. And to be honest, I look around me still and I see the same things.
That's come up a fair few times, that you saw a need and you found a way to do something about it. Yeah. And I guess this crosses that divide of whether it's a product or a service. And in your case, you're providing a service, that the service is to identify appropriately qualified, appropriately just the appropriate people for the jobs that you're recruiting for, and that takes a bit of nous, and also takes an understanding of the sector that you're recruiting for. But let me ask you this. Do you see a difference between the entrepreneurs that you know, and use yourself as an example, obviously, the difference between that group and leaders? Is there a difference? And if there is, what do you think that is? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, look, I do a lot of thinking on leadership as part of my business, and a lot of evaluation of great leaders and some not great ones, but mostly the ones we end up dealing with are pretty good. I believe my wife is a leader. Eleanor and I have a really strong personal and professional partnership, and have done for 15 years. She's highly strategic. She can translate, I guess ideas and vision into strategy and organisational plans and organisational outcomes probably better than most people that I know. So, those things are what I consider to be really good leadership attributes, organisational leadership attributes. And like I kind of mentioned before, I don't really do any thinking on what an entrepreneur is or what they do. The one thing I think is probably tolerance of risk. I have quite a high tolerance of risk. And as I mentioned, I was able to see something that I thought was being done really badly, and I couldn't tolerate it. And I had to do it better in a way that satisfied my drive for service to the sector. So I guess, one thing you'll see probably when you're doing your wrap on this podcast, I'm not short of opinions. I was pretty motivated, and I had the tools to do something about it, and the backup of a great person to support me in my wife. So
That's a brilliant analysis there, and I can understand now why in some circumstances, and this might apply to every entrepreneur and every leader that you might speak to, that if you've got someone that you can bounce ideas off and has your back when it comes to the business or the risk that you're taking, that having that go-to person is an important thing. And why I say this is that having a discussion with a couple, Kath and Tom Long from Curramine in North Queensland, and they're entrepreneurs in their own right, and they talked about how their skills complement one another, and that's an interesting dynamic when you're running a business. So this kind of segues nicely into the next area that I'd like to talk to you about, mate, is the difficulties, the struggles about being an entrepreneur. What do you think they are, and how? And more interestingly, and not that that's not a bad thing to highlight what you think the difficulties are, but how do you overcome some of those difficulties, mate?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, there's the roller coaster ride of business performance and the continuous demand of the work. It absolutely never lets up. So for the first, 5 years of this business, there was no break for it. And we had our child in the middle of all that too, which just helped things along a bit. But there's also that balance of sales and business development. There's the working on the business, so the business improvement type work, which in a small business, I think has to be continuous. And it's one of the benefits and opportunities of a small business is how mobile and versatile and flexible you can be for your clients. Then there's all the stuff about team management, business growth, and of course a healthy home life that needs to be attended to, and those things are all part of it. So, the most difficult part of being an entrepreneur, I don't know. It's a busy job. It's more than that because, I think there's no closing the door and forgetting about it, or going home and forgetting about it. Particularly because we all work from home. But I also don't see the grass being greener anywhere else. And I definitely prefer to be self-determined in my life and work.
Yes,
I have a personality type that absolutely it creates a drive for that. And having to serve someone else's corporate agenda that might not be aligned to my own values and attitudes, I know it isn't healthy for me in the long term. So now I make other people do that with my corporate agenda.
The ironing, the ironic nature of that statement, Mark. Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from. I mean, I've said this in previous podcasts. I'm so risk averse that I don't think I could do what you've done in your life, and so more power to you. And I guess this is one of those things about how do you value your world of work, and what drives you to be someone in any of the professions you might think about. I don't mean the strict professions like teaching and the legal profession and so on, but what professional pathway do you take in life? And whilst I look at entrepreneurs like yourself and others that I've met and other leaders that I've met, that trying to find your niche in the world is difficult, and I guess at times is made more difficult when you've got a family to bring up. And I know you've got young kids, a young daughter.
Yeah.
I can't empathise too much. I've got 2 teenagers here that are stuck with me at home for a month, and they're being schooled from home, so I understand the pain of having the kids at home. So when she hits the teenage years, we can talk then about what it means to have a kid at home. So I understand that dilemma, but I also realise, joking aside, that I'm trying to find a way to put a label on it, if that's appropriate, that the time that's needed to commit to doing what you're doing to run a business is never ending. And if you stop, you don't manage that to the extent that it's a benefit to your business, then the business can go downhill, because it was created by you, so you need to be attentive to it. And like an attentive parent, you can't just neglect the business. So I get that fully. Let me move on to something a bit more positive here. So you're in business for lots of reasons, I guess, and one of them for me is understanding, how do you measure success? So from the Mark Ogston view of the world, how do you measure success, mate?
I thought you might ask me that, and it's a good one, because I measure our success when I see our clients have success, and I'm very confident when I say that our clients are successful when they are making happier, healthier, and wealthier communities. And I really believe that the ones that we work with and the ones that we assist establish really high-performing leadership teams do that better than the ones who don't work with us. And it's kind of, that could be a bit of ego talking, but, I look at them and, I see what they're doing, and I see the outcomes, and I see how things just start to happen properly and well. And that is what I see as a successful outcome for our business. Our mission, I mentioned it before, is to transform local governments everywhere through high-performing people. And we did a values mapping exercise relatively recently, and these were always part of us, but really drawing down into them and, making our values of serving our clients' needs always, striving for excellence always, leading in our sector, and just doing the right thing. I think when we operate from those values, then the rest of the business just happens. And I also I was only working in what I would call a normal recruitment agency for a short time, but what I saw there is a high focus on sales. And for me and my team, and I recruit people who have this as a part of them as well, but it isn't about sales. It's about the care we take to understand our clients, the effort we put in to getting the best group of people for our clients to select from for their vacancies, of course, and then the support that we give them and the candidates through the decision-making process. It is purely intensive care that we give for both groups. And that's not a focus on inputs like number of sales calls or, any of that sort of pressure type work. It is that for us, it's about the outcomes. Did we get the right people? Did it happen when we said it would happen? Were our clients well advised? Were our candidates satisfied with the process, whether they were successful or not? Was it fair to them, and was it reasonable? And I think because we select people who want to do that rather than the sales type work in our business, it means that we get people who care about those things as well. And the culture and attitude that I have to do our job is reflected in the people that work with us as well.
Sure, and that's very much a bent on quality versus quantity of candidates, because you could easily fall into that trap that, you know, we've recruited 1,000 in a year. I mean, if 1,000 brought in some big bucks, great, but if those 1,000 aren't there the next year, does nothing for your reputation. And a focus on quality, I would suggest, based on the discussions that we've had in other forums, would suggest to me that you've got long-term clients that stick with you for that reason, and that makes sense to me. So let me tease something else out here, because I think I know where you're going to come with this, but I'm not you, so I'm not going to answer this question myself.
Okay.
Entrepreneurs' capability. So from what you've seen, and I'm asking this from the Mark perspective, so the capabilities you've developed, what do you think are the most critical capabilities for an entrepreneur?
I've had the opportunity to talk to people over time who want to go into business for themselves. And they're often people who are in my candidate group or client group who just get a bit sick of doing what they're doing and decide to go consulting or something like that. And the thing I always say is, you need to know what it is that you do really well. You need to know why you want to do it. And you also need to know who might value what you do and who's going to pay you for it, value it even enough to pay for it. So once you've sort of worked out what it is that you do well, and you understand why it is that you might want to do that, and who might pay for it, then you have to go to those people and get them on board with your idea or your service or your product, if you're a products person, I suppose, and get them on board and get them part of the mission. I mentioned that, a capability before about the flexibility that entrepreneurial companies have to have. They have to be adaptable, flexible to their clients' needs. And I think that focus on adaptability and flexibility is really one of the things that defines entrepreneurial businesses, and that gets easily lost as organizations grow, because you do tend to burden yourself with business processes and sort of lots of things that get in the way of you being nimble and internally innovating.
I'd really like to get your views on a couple of statements here, mate. The first one being, entrepreneurs are risk takers.
I think we've already covered that risk to you is different to what it is to me. You've said before that you're really risk averse, and I've sort of said that I'm really not that much. So, what my take on the risk is might be very different to yours. And I think I already said, you see some things and you just cannot leave them the way they are, and it doesn't really matter, or it certainly isn't as so important of the normal risk that you might appreciate. You just put them to one side and go and do it. I'm not a great planner. I like to go and do things and figure it out as we go. Eleanor, on the other hand, is a great planner and very good at making sure that those building blocks are there. Grenade catching is generally another term for Eleanor. But Eleanor also has quite a high tolerance for risk as well. So as a couple, we actually are quite reasonably similar personality types, but she's a very much more structured person, and that's definitely helps. So are we risk takers? Probably, compared to most people, I guess. But I think it would be a bigger risk for us, and certainly me, to try and keep working as I've matured as a professional and as a person, to be working within someone else's business if I wasn't totally aligned to it. It would be a big problem.
Yeah, fair enough. And that speaks to as you mature more, particularly as you mature as a leader, let alone someone who is of an entrepreneurial bent, that as you get older and more experienced, the capacity to move back to that 9-to-5 aligned job with someone who, might be difficult to align your values to theirs would be a difficult proposition. I can fully understand that. So here's the next one for you, Mark. Entrepreneurs are persistent.
Yeah, you have to be persistent. Although I guess I kind of said it before that I don't really respect barriers very well. So if there's if I'm running up against something, I don't tend to just try and figure out that. I'll just go around it. I'll find another way in. And that has always been my way since I was a small child. I'm just not interested in being told no.
and that feeds into the next one. I think I know where you're going to go with this, but for the benefit of the tape, entrepreneurs are innovators.
Maybe. I don't think it, like when I went through and had to think about this, certainly risk is one of them. Certainly some ability to look to the future and see how things might be is one of them. But are they innovators? Well, probably there's an element of that, but that's really just listening and seeing what's needed and figuring out how you can do it in a way that really suits that particular situation or client or circumstance. So, yeah, is that innovation? I don't really think too much about this stuff, but
no, that's fine. I guess me being the again for the benefit of those listening, because I'm a early career researcher in some respects. It's interesting to me to hear real people talk about how they define terms, and to me, innovation is sometimes a misused term, or an often to a term that is used maybe not to the textbook definition of what that means. And for me, in my travels as a leader, and again, very different pathway to yours, Mark, that when I look at innovation, when you've presented this story about why you do the things that you do in your business, that to me, the innovation there is that you saw something that didn't fit with your worldview. You went in and had a go and did something different.
Yeah.
Now, your capacity to do that has in no small measure probably impacted the businesses of the clients that you've got and the people that you've placed in those businesses. So if that is a degree of innovation, because you've got to try and find people that other recruiters aren't finding and place them in appropriate positions with clients that you want to succeed. So I think what's in a name, what's in a definition, but it's something for me to keep thinking about, and I want others to think about that. I always saw from the outside looking in that people that move in your world are definitely innovative thinkers, but what I think some people think about innovation is high tech or something that is very not related to the term. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's interesting that you gave the response that you gave. So let me move to something that you have given me some feedback on, but I'd like to tease it out a bit more. Entrepreneurs are strategic thinkers.
Strategy is important, but it isn't the main thing. The main thing is the doing. And particularly when you're a sole trader like I was for a couple of years, it was really about just getting out there and getting it happening. Yeah, so the ability to, I guess, see a path and, put the pieces in place to progress yourself along that, yes, I think you do that. But I think most people have that. I guess I don't think I'm a particularly strategic thinker. I know that Eleanor is.
Oh, there you go. That's fine, mate. Again, no right and wrong answers here.
No.
I guess what I'm hearing here is that if you've got the strategy to go forward, you want to be the one to implement how to get there, as opposed to the one that actually drew up the map. Firstly, yeah, okay, totally understandable. Final one: entrepreneurs use foresight, so thinking about possible futures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's you are looking the future to the best of your knowledge and intuition, and making a call on how you think it might go. And I think it's really useful to think about a couple of different ways that it might go and prepare yourself for those eventualities. With the depth of experience and exposure I've had to this group of people in this sector, I think I'm getting reasonably good at predicting outcomes of things. Particularly around people. As a recent example, if this person is elected, what might happen to that executive leadership team?
Yeah. Yes, the inevitable political side of what you do, and yeah, I'd get that.
So I think so. I think you have to, because that has an impact on your activity and your resourcing, and I guess where you put your energy, and that is finite. The amount of time and energy you have for things is finite. So you have to, really think about where you put it.
Yeah, very, very much agree. Mark, the issue of mentoring has come up in a lot of the podcasting that I've done and in my own leadership travels. I just wanted to get your perspective on the process and the degree of formality. So formal mentoring versus informal, and what did you use in your pathway as an entrepreneur, mate?
So I've got a great group of friends people I've been friends with since I was a kid, and one or two of those are really excellent people who are thoughtful about business, really terrifically good at it as well. And from time to time, I'll just have a quick chat with them, or I'll seek something out from them, just for a bit of perspective from people who are outside my sector and who don't have really any connection to it. I've always been quite aspirational, and I like talking to people who do things well, and try and pick up little bits and pieces from that. But one of the mayors that I do a bit of work with is a very successful businessman, and he refreshes my perspective, gives me a bit of focus from time to time. And again, it's not a formal thing. I just have a chat with him and sort of put a few issues that I might have on the table, and he'll come back to me. He's a very successful businessman in his own right. He's only about 4 or 5 years older than me, and it's a good relationship.
Yeah, that's very similar to a lot of the people I know in the circles that I work in, that the mentoring is very much an informal thing, and you reach out to those people that can provide some counsel, and sometimes that's a bit of a reality check on what it is that you're doing, because often, and I'll use my perspective here, I try and pick informal mentors that will give me that occasional smack across the head and go, no, what the hell are you thinking? And that sometimes you need it, because occasionally an ego check is a good thing, because with having a truth sayer that's not in any way connected to what you do can be a refreshing thing, because at times the degree to which you're introspective can be limited, and so having someone looking at it completely from the outside and going, hey, did you even think about this? You go, oh shit, okay, and the blinkers come off, and suddenly the grey matter gets into gear. So look, mate, one final question here, and this is one that I've adapted from the standard leadership questions that I ask in the other podcast. But from your experience, are entrepreneurs born or made?
A good question. Again, I've mentioned it a few times. We've gone through like a few of these things, but I think I have a personality which is reasonably suited to what might be considered to be an entrepreneurial type. And if you're a Myers-Briggs type indicator follower, that's ENTP, so extroverted, intuitive, thinking, perceiving. My wife is an ENTJ, which is why we're quite similar, but the difference between the two is that ultimately results in her being a lot more organised and corporately oriented than I am. You too?
I'm an ENTJ crossed with the other one. I was on the first letter from memory. I was
probably
an
I. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Look, I don't put a whole lot of stock in that stuff, and I certainly don't use personality as a selection tool, but as a language for understanding yourself and others, which is critical, I think, in any sort of endeavour, but certainly if you're in business for yourself, you need to understand what you're good at and what your preferences are and what you're likely to ignore, and try and have that organised. So just as I'm sitting here sort of talking, I remember seeing a show on TV years ago, before I was even in business. I was working in London, probably, bossing a bunch of garbos around. And there was a show which was testing entrepreneurs. And there was this guy who brought the first of those little scooters into the world, those little scooters all the kids get around on. And he was the guy that imported them into the UK. And he was in his 20s. He was a totally disruptive individual in the television program, but he absolutely refused to play by the rules of the entrepreneurial testing game that they were doing there. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this is why he's successful, because he's just not interested in the rules of the game. And of course I was attracted to that because I'm a bit that way myself, but perhaps that's what it is. You're born to it. You're not necessarily interested in doing things the way they've always been done. And can that be learned? Oh, absolutely, yeah. But But is there an ingrained or personality level promoter, or is there a personality level that might make you more that way inclined? Then yeah, I should think there probably is. Yeah.
That's interesting, Matt. You know, I will come back to everyone when I've got a couple of hundred of these done, and maybe I'll be able to pick out those core personality types. And it for me, from a research side of things, this is critically important to me, because one of the things about building knowledge in an area is talking to real people, as opposed to having a paper and pencil test that really only tests thinking at one point in time, as opposed to being able to tease out what people are thinking. And look, I hope when this podcast gets published, that people that listen to it really get from where you're coming from, because so far each of the entrepreneurs that I've spoken to have thought about these things in slightly different ways. And I think it's also part of the environment that you work in, because you work in a very competitive environment, you work in a very politicized environment, you work in an environment where professionals are needed quite desperately across the place. You've got different size businesses you deal with. You've got the whole kit and caboodle when it comes to an industry, whereas in some industries like the IT sector, the sky can be the limit, and there really isn't those limitations in place. So I think the kind of thinking that's required on a contextual basis will change depending on the person. Now, this isn't some new revelation, but it's something to be considered when you're talking about the kind of person that gets into certain fields and then becomes an entrepreneur in that field. That there's just something about that context, and if that's not challenging you, then you wouldn't be an entrepreneur, one, and two, you'd be doing something else. Like you said, you'd be working for a paycheck somewhere, probably not liking what you're doing, but definitely working for somebody else. So I fully get that. Look, Mark, I do appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing and providing those insights to me in this discussion. And for those listening, I've been speaking with Mark Ogston, who is the Director and Principal of Leading Roles. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, Eric. This has been terrific.
For those listening, this has been Eric Perez, your podcast host. I will catch you all on the next podcast.